The girl stood at the window looking in, and suddenly there was the long-awaited sound of a door opening, and the girl ran at the sound. The only prince of the empire was Kailos Rudbihi. He was the master of this estate and the guardian of this girl. Or maybe there was something more between them. Though such emotions were not allowed to her, and the men always emphasized that she was obliged to behave like a lady. It had been 3 months since the emperor's half-brother had left, and from time to time he left his domain and stayed in the capital. Since he was the only one with enough influence besides the emperor himself, he was not short of work. The journey from the capital to his fortress took 6 hours on horseback, and of course she was a little lonely at heart, but the joy of the long-awaited meeting drowned out this feeling. The girl ran to the garden and saw the knights there, and wondered if she would be noticed by the one she was trying so hard to look good. Suddenly, one of the knights called Brance came up to Lady Garnesh, and she bowed and said that she was very glad to see them back at Rudbihi Fortress. Then the girl asked if her uncle had already come. The knight froze and did not know what to say, and timidly said that he had come, but the girl did not let him finish, and guessed that there was some reason why she should not go where her uncle was. Suddenly the girl shuddered and heard a voice from behind the knights praising their garden, and another girl saying that she would be terribly sorry if she could not make it. Her uncle sat beside the girl and told her that her beauty clouded his eyes so that he could not see the charms of the garden. Though Chloe was standing quite far away, she heard and saw how the uncle flirted with Betty, and every action of his was reflected in her eyes, and the loud laughter came from the lips of a strange girl, not Chloe. The uncle was getting closer and closer to the girl, and knew that Chloe was watching them, and saw everything. And suddenly Knight Bruns reported that Marquis Elizabeth Rosalind was now with Chloe's uncle. That he was coming from the capital with some woman was not unusual, but she did not want to see his lips touching another girl. He came to Chloe 3 days after his return, and she learned from the servants that his girlfriend had left the same day at night. Later, when Chloe was in her room, her uncle came to see her. She even thought it would be a dream. He saw her disappointment and thought she was no longer happy to see him. Then Chloe jumped up from the bed and said it wasn't like that at all. Then Uncle smiled and abruptly grabbed Chloe by the arms and pressed her against the wall. For him, she was as beautiful as ever. He thought that even the queen of fairies from legends would hide from shame if she saw her. Chloe blushed from how close he was to her. Then he lifted her face by her chin and asked how she was going to avoid him, though they hadn't seen each other for so long. The girl gently turned her head away and said that she had already seen him 3 days ago, and then her uncle realized that she had caught the Marquise. She wasn't bad at all, especially to keep her around, so he wanted Chloe to try not to do anything stupid, because if she got angry, he wouldn't be able to protect her. He thought she knew how smart she was, and he didn't even wait for her answer because he would have heard yes or done anyway. While her uncle was kissing her, Chloe decided to stop him before it was too late and asked him to wait. When he grudgingly pulled away from her, he looked her over and said that her body was as beautiful as ever, but he thought she had lost weight since they had not seen each other, and he did not like thin women. Chloe knew what was the true meaning of these words, because in fact, he liked thin women, but she could not meet his tastes because she was just a bait that he would throw at the feet of the emperor. Kylo saved her as a child. Her mother took Chloe to a place and begged the Lord to take her child. But the woman was refused, but she kept asking, and then a man came out with a big stick and said that she had to leave nicely, as it was the Lord's order, so the man didn't want her to hold a grudge against him. The girl was 6 years old when she learned that her father was barren. The mother and daughter continued to stand outside the door of Garnesh Manor, screaming and shouting until they began beating her mother. The girl could only watch as the most beautiful woman in their village was brutally beaten. When the woman was already dying and very beaten, she begged the men to take the child away, but soon she fell to the snow and never got up again. And so the only source of warmth left the little girl. Of course, Viscount Garnesh remembered this woman. She was so beautiful that even her marriage was not an obstacle to his passion, but he did not need the consequences. In the end, Chloe was picked up by his son, who always smiled and said strange things like she had to let herself be examined or kneel before him at his command. If the girl dared to look up at him even once, he was amused and always asked if he allowed her to do so. The young master of the Garnesh family always treated people below his status as dogs. In this family, Chloe was just a pet. They made her walk on all fours to lick her master's heels and sleep on a horrible mat. She was just a toy to them. One day, a man arrived at the Garnesh estate. It was Kylos. The young master of the Garnesh family realized that it was Kylos's first time at their estate, and he was going to show him something interesting. Kylos noticed Chloe and realized that she was the illegitimate daughter of the Garnesh family, and he had heard that they treated her worse than cattle. Maybe it was because Chloe couldn't get his attention, but that day she was being bullied more than usual. After the abuse, when she was alone in her cell, and Kylos came to her. That day, Kylos showed Chloe care for the first time. He didn't hurt her. He just brought her ointment to treat her cuts and bruises. The next time Kylos brought her soup, Chloe pounced on it like she had never seen or eaten soup before. That was when Kylos first offered to help her and offered to leave with him, but Chloe didn't understand why he was asking her that. That was when she first believed Kylos and accepted his offer. That same night, a terrible fire broke out at Garnesh Manor, the demon-like flames mercilessly consuming her biological father and his entire family. When Chloe stood outside and watched the burning manor, her uncle came to her and said that now she was alone, but Chloe did not think so, because she had no one from the beginning, and then her uncle took her with him. It was snowing that day. She remembered the crunch of the snow under her feet and the clatter of the wheels carrying her away. And that winter day when she took Kylos by the hand and arrived at Prince Rudbihi's estate. After meeting Kylos, her life had changed dramatically. When the girl apologized before turning around because she didn't know his name, Kylos told her that if she wanted to make up a nickname for him, she would be better off calling him Uncle. After all, her own father would now be his distant relative. Because of her illiteracy, she knew nothing about the world, much less the meaning of the word uncle. That's when it became strange to her because no one had ever called him that. So she decided to call him Uncle, and he praised her for it. Later, Kylos saw that she looked much better after the shower, and she was much prettier than he thought, and it was a compliment. The Prince of Rudbihi Fortress turned out to be quite a kind and gentle man, unlike his kind in Garnesh. The man told her that this was her home from now on, and she was not to forget that she would always have the Rudbihi family behind her. That's how Kylos became her guardian, and thanks to him, she was a lady from a poor family related to the Rudbihi family, and she was able to make such a transformation. At breakfast, Chloe admired the beautiful and tasty food. Kylos loved everything beautiful in this world. He clung to the beauty that faded with time anyway. It was so naive. He had only one reason to leave Chloe before the meal began. Chloe thanked her mother for giving birth to her beautiful. She looked just like her mother. Her face only created anger in the Garnesh family. But because of that, she had been able to meet Kylos. Chloe had to remember that there were many beautiful girls around the emperor, and she would not be able to captivate him with her beauty alone. So she studied hard to gain his favor. She liked Kylos's touch, especially when he stroked her head as a reward. So she learned about the world, and finally she understood his words that she was just a bait that Kylos wanted to throw at the emperor's feet. Kylos always wondered how His Majesty could not fall in love with Chloe because she was so beautiful. Kylos was a gentle and sweet man, but not only to him, but to other girls as well. Sometimes this tenderness became a deadly poison, and her case was no exception. She submitted to his tenderness and fell blindly in love. Perhaps it was also part of Kylos's plan, but she was just a flower that he planned to plant next to the emperor. So because she was in love, she would never be able to betray him and abandon the plan. One day, Chloe decided to tell her uncle that she liked him for a long time, and because of her naivety, she couldn't hide her feelings, which only kept growing. Then, closing the book he was reading, he looked at Chloe with a smile and said that he had been waiting for this for a long time, waiting for the moment when she would finally become a girl. And when he pulled her to him so that she was in his arms, he pulled her to him and kissed her passionately. After the kiss, he pulled her away and said that it was too soon. But he liked her too, and their feelings were mutual, for she was the only one in this fortress he could call his family. She could also bring him his brother's head in the future. So how could he not love her for that? Kylos's brother's name is Raymond del Astaroth, and Chloe was raised to seduce and destroy him, and that was her only goal. Then the girl realized that the man she loved wasn't cute at all, and at 17 she finally realized what was going on. She wanted to hide her feelings, but it was too late, and they came out and enveloped her from head to toe. Then he took her by the shoulder and asked her not to run away. He stroked her cheek and asked her to look into his eyes. When she did, her eyes were ruby-like gemstone eyes filled with tears. He gently moved closer to her and kissed her again, but in an unusually tender way. Kylos thought the look on his face would drive him crazy, but she couldn't be that stupid because she'd have to try harder to satisfy her brother. Then she told Chloe not to worry, because she would still learn. She didn't know how he understood her thoughts, but during the third kiss, she wrapped both arms around Kylos's neck and hoped that their relationship wouldn't change. When Chloe was walking in the garden under the blazing sun, Kylos came up to her and kissed her on the lips and then pointed to the peonies and said that they were finally blooming. At that moment, she always thought she and he were like lovers from a fairy tale. But one day she realized that he was having fun with other women right in front of her eyes, so her dreams were being shattered. Then she realized that it meant nothing to him, and in the end, their relationship didn't change at all. He told Chloe that she was so beautiful, and there was no one in the world better than her, and that his picky brother wouldn't be able to resist her. So she was caught in the net of his false words, and of course, there was no tenderness in the kisses, but they were not disgusting to her, for she wanted his care too much. Marquise Rosalind brought Chloe her apple tea and asked her to wait for a while, for her uncle had not returned yet, and in the girl, Marquise recognized the bait that Kylos had told her about. Marquise Rosalind came here more often, but Kylos kept her close to him and ordered Chloe to stay out of her way. But one day she came when Kylos wasn't home and couldn't leave his guests alone. Marquise said that Kylos said that there was nothing to worry about, so she didn't pay much attention to it. But since she met the guests instead of the master, it looked like he trusted Chloe a lot. The girl said with a smile that it couldn't be because she was just an illegitimate child from a poor family. However, for the Marquise was the fact that she called Mr. Uncle and lived with him in the same house already caused laughter, and the blood ties of families Rudbihi and Garnesh has long been weakened. Chloe turned to the lady and said that she was just a pathetic girl who was not worth her attention, so she asked the Marquise not to worry about Chloe. Then the Marquis said that then, as befitted a wretched girl, she should kneel before her. Then Chloe, without further objection or argument, got up from her seat and went over to the Marquise and knelt down. The Marquise took a glass of tea and tipped it over Chloe. Of course, Kylos taught Chloe some things, but among them there was no notion of pride. She felt no shame, but was glad that the tea was not so hot. Otherwise, her face would be scarred, and that would mean the end of her stay here. The Marquise, in addition, made Chloe look up at her and said how pathetic she was. But at that moment, a gentleman came in and took an interest in this presentation. The woman was not expecting him to return and dropped the cup on the floor, and it shattered and cut Chloe's hand. Then Kylos ran up to the Marquise and took her in his arms and asked her if she was all right and if she was afraid, but she apologized to the gentleman and said it was a misunderstanding. Now she stroked not only Chloe's head, but also the other women's. Chloe's arm was very sore, but at this point, Kylos yelled at Chloe for what she had done to his guest. Chloe was sorry and apologized to her uncle, but Kylos told her to go to her room and think about her behavior, and he would call her later because he was worried that the weak-willed Marquise might run into her again. He did not even look at Chloe, and it was too cruel for her, and this punishment was worse than a knife. Suddenly, Knight Bruns came up to her and held out his hand and said he would escort her, but she refused, saying it wasn't worth it, but he thought it was worth it. Knight Brantz walked her to her room even though she objected. Suddenly, the girl took her hand from his palm and said there was no need to go any further with her. That's when he saw the cut on her hand and asked to let him help at least a little and rewound it. It wasn't until some time later that she realized she hadn't even thanked the knight for his help. At sunset, Kylos came to her and told her that they had already talked about the fact that he could not protect her from the Marquis because she could hurt her. And then she asked if Chloe thought he didn't care. Then, holding her hand, her uncle said that Chloe was a priceless treasure that he had to give to his brother. And if it weren't for those words at the end, she might have dreamed of love. Kylos untied the bandage on her arm and told Chloe to be careful, and then he kissed the cut and even ran his tongue over it as if licking her wound. His kisses from his fingertips spread all over her body. Her scratched hand tried to catch the edge of her clothes, but her defense was too weak to resist his skillful attacks. As he approached her face, he asked how old she would be this year, and then the girl didn't have time to answer, and the knight said it was time for the lord to present her as a debutante. Kylos agreed that it was indeed time. Chloe knew exactly what he was talking about, and it only made it more painful, and unlike him, who had been waiting for this moment, She only kept wishing that this time would never come. On the day of the reception, Kylo showed Chloe where the emperor was and she had to seduce him. Next to him was Empress Darius. Their marriage was arranged, so this relationship was just for publicity. But Chloe shouldn't think that she would give up her seat easily, and she would probably try to use Chloe, so she had to be careful with the Empress. It was interesting what was now the expression on the face of the man to whom she had to show her love from all her strength. Chloe came and greeted the son of the Empire. She introduced herself and said that she was from the Garnish family. One day after New Year's Eve, Kylos took the girl to the imperial ball. Then she told her that he couldn't be near her, because then his brother wouldn't be able to approach her, and she understood that. She guessed that he would be by her side when she made her debut, and she was to be accompanied by Brance. Kylos saw that she was upset, but Chloe said that she was only a little upset. And then Kylos kissed her and said that her eyes were really beautiful. It was the look she should have saved for his brother. Then he stroked her head and told her in her ear that she was a good girl who deserved to be rewarded. Then he walked past her and told her that she should have been looking forward to it. The girl had already been given a karate, and as she got in, she thought about him still riding with her to the palace. But then, Knight Brun said that the Lord had gone to see the Marquis Rosalind. It looked like he would be accompanying her today, and of course it was no surprise. After her appearance, the whole hall was stunned, for Kylos had spread a rumor that Lady Garnish was a very pretty girl, so there were many people who wanted to know more about her, and Kylos was only hiding her from prying eyes. Her uncle met her in the hall and called her to him and told her to say hello to the Lord. Kylos also told Betty that he would be gone for a while, and Chloe thought that they were perfect for each other. That man over there was the Emperor, and she thought about it as their gazes met. Raymond del Astaroth was the half-brother of her favorite man and the master of this continent, and he was also a crazy warrior. He went to the battlefield from the age of 14. Even in battle with dozens of enemies, he had never lost once, the best warrior in the Asta Empire. And her uncle, looking at him, called his brother a ravenous beast. Kylos approached the Emperor and said, pointing at the girl, that it was the one he told about. Chloe greeted the son of the Empire and introduced herself, saying that she was from the Garnish family. The man realized that she was the one Kylos was guarding and told the girl to raise her face. Chloe didn't think his voice was warm or gentle, and she couldn't believe that he had the same kind and gentle Kylos in his veins. And that smirking face belonged to the one she needed to seduce. He had become emperor as a 14-year-old child, but in those 10 years he had never wavered or feared the weight of his crown. The emperor and Kylos exchanged a few more words, but none of them reached her ears, and afterward she couldn't remember anything. When she sat down on a chair and was able to relax, a knight came up to her and asked if she was all right, and she smiled and thanked him for taking care of her. When the music started playing, Lady Garnish was asked to dance, and during the dance she changed partners. At one point she noticed that the emperor was bored, and so after she finished the dance, she decided to rest as she became dizzy. Knight Brance came up to her and asked if she wanted to rest, but she said she was going to walk alone and hurried out of the hall. It wasn't really the dancing that made her dizzy, but the fact that at one moment her uncle and Lady Rosalind had disappeared, and Chloe was very angry. She kept wondering if there was something between her uncle and the Marquis, because if rumors were to be believed, they were about to announce their engagement. Chloe was so jealous of Marquise Rosalind because the prince looked at her with such fascinated eyes, and she wondered what it was like to be loved by such a gentle and majestic man. As she walked down the corridor, she could only hear talk of these two, and her head kept spinning, and something inside her was pounding. Behind her on the terrace came the Emperor. Only she wanted to greet him as he took her by the chin and said that if she did not want to, he could refuse. The Emperor turned out to be a simple man rather than believing the rumors, and simply interrupted her greeting and came closer. His strong arm trembled as he tried to control the force so he wouldn't hurt her inadvertently, so no one would blame him for sneaking up on her like that. His scarlet eyes looked so simple and like he was afraid of getting rejected, but she wasn't going to. Then Chloe said she was fine with it. Then those words signaled the Emperor, and that's when he sank his lips into hers. He was assertive and leaned on the edge of the balcony and pinned the girl between him and the railing. When he pulled away from the girl, he asked if she would follow him. Chloe thought it was disrespectful of her, but she stared intently into the Emperor's face. Then she noticed it and just turned and went to the exit. The girl silently followed the Emperor and closed the door to the terrace and followed him along the corridor, and so they spent the night together. In the morning, Chloe came to see the Lord, and while she was with the emperor by his order, he spent time with this woman. Marquise understood that the girl came to see the Lord and contentedly passed by her. Chloe came to the room from which the Marquise had left and heard Kylos asking Betty where she had gone, and in the doorway he saw Chloe and asked her why she was standing so far away, and she could have gone closer. Her head was spinning from the dirty lovemaking he wasn't even hiding. Kylos stroked Chloe's cheek and asked if the emperor had hugged her last night. Kylos happily asked Chloe about that night. It was unbearably painful to explain to the man she loved how she had spent the night with another man. But when he stroked her head, she responded faithfully. Already now his thumb was on her lips and hinted at a kiss. Then he pulled her to him and kissed her, saying that the emperor had touched those delicate lips. During the kiss, he got so carried away that he started to bite her lip, and only a few hours ago he had been in contact with another woman's flesh, so this kiss seemed cruel to her. His tongue moving slowly in her mouth made her feel like she was going to cry. Kylos pulled away from the girl and told her that he had filled this beautiful body with him, and everything had gone as they had planned, and soon the emperor would visit her again. She blamed everything on every touch of his hands, and for the first time thoughts of rejection visited her head. Kylos thought that he had already tried it once, so now he would never forget this beautiful body. Chloe didn't know if it would happen that way, but that was why he was able to send her to another man so easily. Kylos, as if knew what Chloe wanted to know, and told her in her ear that the empress had not had children for a long time, so she had to get pregnant by the emperor, a child. But his main goal was to get rid of his brother and become emperor himself. And if she could give birth, then when he ascended to the throne, what would happen to the child? He hoped she would do it for his sake, but she couldn't think about his orders. He wanted her to have a child with the emperor. After that day, Chloe became very ill. She just lay in bed and couldn't get up or go outside. But later, as Kylos said, the emperor sent a carriage to her. Because of the illness, her face had lost a lot of weight, and to hide it, she had a bright makeup and a beautiful dress prepared. Kylos saw Chloe and said how beautiful she looked. But the girl looked in the mirror and realized that she had lost a little weight. Although for Kylos, who loves thin girls, it couldn't be better. Kylos walked up to the girl, and a cold metal touched her neck. It was a random necklace he believed she would do well. The whispering in her ears seemed to be the voice of the devil, because the meaning of her life was only to seduce the emperor. When Chloe arrived at the palace to the emperor, he even remembered her name. When the girl greeted him, he waved his hand to the butler to leave them. Then he asked her to raise her face and was pleasantly surprised. The next second he waved his finger at her, and when she came up, he stroked her cheek and said how could it be that she was his type from top to toe? It was only natural for her to be the bait that Kylos had raised to seduce the emperor. The emperor pulled the girl sharply to his neck and kissed her. Chloe had been taught to close her eyes during the kiss, but she didn't want to do that, and his scarlet hair tickled her eyelids like rays of the real sun, and her hands closed to better remember who was in front of her. The emperor touched her clenched hands and said he wouldn't be rough, so she could relax. But the girl noticed that even though Kylos and the emperor were half-brothers, they didn't look alike at all, except for that soft smile at the corner of his eyes, and it scared her. She felt strange and wrapped her arms around his neck and hugged him as she could no longer look into the emperor's eyes. She asked His Majesty to embrace her. There was only emptiness in her soul, but the affectionate words kept coming out of her lips, which made her sadder, and a bitter sneer ran across her face, which he could not see at that second. And the softness of the emperor's face around her made her laugh. She was afraid that he would discover her true intentions, so she decided to give herself over to pleasure. Until she was disgusted with herself, she closed her eyes. When she opened her eyes, she realized that she had fallen asleep, and the emperor was lying in front of her, and noticed that she was awake. Of course, the emperor still looked bossy, but more relaxed than when they first met. Stroking her head, he said he would send a carriage twice a week. Later, the realization of his words came to her. As her man wanted, she became the emperor's mistress, but rumors about it spread very quickly and contributed to it Kyle Rudbihi, a cruel man whom Chloe unrequitedly loved. The sky was cloudless and the weather was beautiful. It was the perfect day for an engagement party. Today, one couple in love would unite their future. Chloe went to her uncle's house to congratulate him on his engagement. Just as she was congratulating him, Elizabeth came up to Kylos and fixed a strand of his hair, and he kissed her for it, and she got embarrassed. Chloe came closer to them and said that she was so happy that Rudbiggy Manor would have a mistress. Elizabeth at first looked at Chloe with arrogance, but suddenly her face changed to a smiling and pleased face and thanked her for the congratulations, for they added to her joy, and was not Chloe the most famous person in the capital. Then Chloe lowered her eyes and said that it was all thanks to them. Just as the Marquis said now, the most commotion in the capital was on her behalf, Chloe Garnesh of Rudbighy Castle. At first, the carriage from the Emperor's castle came twice a week, but as time went on, the number grew to 3 and 4 times a week. Sometimes she was taken to the palace and never returned. Near the small stall, the girls began to whisper about whether they had heard about this particular girl being taken away by the Emperor's carriage. Usually, the servants in the imperial palace were famous for their silence, but this news they spread with the speed of light, and as a result, the guests who came to the wedding of Prince Rudbighy and Marquis Rosalind looked at Chloe from the side. This was the place where they showed the unity of the two families, so that now everyone who could be called nobility in the Asta Empire was gathered here. All these curious looks gave her a headache, but she didn't show it, and then it happened. Chloe saw, as well as all the guests, that the Emperor himself came to the engagement party with congratulations on the engagement. Kylos asked with a smile what brought such a significant person here. Chloe did not understand how it was possible, because in the relationship between Kylos and the Emperor, there was no hint of brotherly love, and the Emperor was not the one who would go to all such events. At that moment, all eyes were fixed on Chloe, but she and the Emperor turned away from each other. Chloe walked through the crowd smiling, because in public they pretended that there was nothing between them, although everyone knew about their relationship, and the Emperor started talking to his brother. The Emperor, who had come to congratulate his brother on his engagement, looked around indifferently, scratching his chin. After a while, he called a footman and whispered something in his ear, and then turned his gaze to Chloe. The Emperor got up from his seat and went somewhere, and a bit like the Emperor's footman came to the girl and gave her what the Emperor told him. The girl looked around and saw that Kylos was busy with Elizabeth and stood up from his seat. Now, the wedding of Prince Kylos Rudbighy and Marquis Elizabeth Rosalind was about to begin, and so everyone had to get up from their seats. But at this time, Chloe was already in the building along the corridor to the appointed room. When she reached the room, she opened the door and bowed. She greeted the Emperor, the son of the Empire. He sat directly across from Chloe and said that he had already told her that he didn't need such greetings. Chloe thought the time and place now seemed unfortunate, but the Emperor walked up to her and put a finger to her lips. That smile looked a hell of a lot like that man. The Emperor said something terrible had happened because it was getting harder and harder for him not to see her. The Emperor was in her power, and that was what he and the man wanted. The Emperor took her by the hand and asked her to come over here, and she ended up on his lap. Her face reflected in her scarlet eyes. Despite her real discomfort, she smiled modestly. The Emperor really couldn't take it anymore, and Chloe too. She snuggled up to him, saying that it was hard to imagine how much she missed him all this short time. Then he hugged her back, and her shoulder was tickled by the Emperor's scarlet hair. And now, right outside the window, there was a salute announcing the beginning of the engagement of her favorite man. The Emperor kneaded and quietly said that he was looking for a way to keep Chloe close to him. But despite the fact that the Emperor was already married to the woman with whom he had promised to spend his life, it had to be taken into account that the marriage with the Empress had taken place by the will of the past Emperor, and it was not the Emperor's wish. The applause of the people outside the window tickled her brain, and she wanted to close the window, but she was held by the Emperor, and it was impossible. Chloe was quite satisfied with everything now, but after these words, the Emperor told Chloe not to cry. For some reason, her eyes became hot. The Emperor wanted to find a way to keep Chloe by his side, so he asked her not to cry. In front of Chloe now stood a man who did not understand what to do, and she just closed and lowered her eyes. That day, before the Black Night, the Emperor was there to hold her in his arms and comfort her wordlessly. Later the next day, it seemed to Kylos that there would be no children in the future for the Emperor and Empress. The Empress could not bear a child, and it was none other than Kylos who did it to the Empress. Chloe sat with him at the same table and said that the relatives of the Empress, and also in the Order of Rami, would not sit idly by. Kylo stood up and headed for the exit, saying that this was exactly what he wanted. But before he left, Kylos thought about something. Since the Emperor had started sending them a carriage, he might have forgotten her age, but he remembered her monthly cycle better than she did. Kylos asked her about her cycle if it had been a long time, and when Chloe started counting, it was only then that she realized that they were a week late. Kylos smiled and said that he would send a doctor to see her, but for now, she had to rest. And that same night, the doctor came to see her and told her that he had a suspected pregnancy. That's when she found out that she was carrying the Emperor's child. Everything turned out as Kylos had planned. The Emperor, having learned the news despite the protests of the nobles and the order, took Chloe to the palace. Of course, Kylos was the happiest of all. Even though she was still worried, it was good, and the thought that he needed Chloe made her happy. The Emperor suddenly asked her what she was thinking about, and she said that she hoped that the child would be like him, and she would like that very much. But her thoughts were completely opposite to his, because he would like it to be like Chloe, and she did not understand why, and the Emperor answered that then it would be even cuter. After these words, she thought how naive this man was, because he did not even know who she was, a beautiful flower or a poisonous thorn. For their wedding, they needed the consent of 2 organizations. The first organization, Rami, is the order of the state religion of the empire, and the second organization is the Council of Nobles, consisting of representatives of 10 families. Especially difficult was with the Council of Nobles had to get the consent of at least 7 of the 10 families. But these nobles would not allow Chloe just so become his wife. But the Emperor, despite their opinion, brought her to the palace. His relationship with the other noble families deteriorated because of this act. In the end, the Emperor could not realize his plan, so he apologized to Chloe all the time. But at that moment, she did not care whether she would become his wife or not, and what was the point if he would die soon anyway? Kylos was telling Chloe to use his feelings. She somehow thought that Kylos had a special talent for playing with other people's feelings. Then, holding her stomach, Chloe said that it would be better for him to look like the Emperor, because only then people would be able to see that the child was his. The Emperor did not understand what she was talking about, because his blood flowed in the veins of this child. Chloe said that he was conceived illegally, and if to compare it with his mother, in whose veins flowed blue blood, there was nothing in her. The Emperor was confused because how could she say such a thing, and he was not going to treat this child in such a way. However, Chloe thought that most people in the order and among the nobles were against their union, and she realized that the Emperor was trying very hard for her. Then he put both hands around her face and said that she didn't need to worry about it. Then he promised that he would definitely make her his wife, and this child would be raised as an official heir, but according to the laws of the empire, one could not have 2 wives. Then he said with a satisfied smile that if it was impossible, then Chloe would be his only wife. Although Kylos had told her to always smile around the Emperor, but now she couldn't help herself. She wished he hadn't noticed her mistake, because the Emperor's words were so serious. She couldn't believe that he wanted to divorce his wife because it was a big price to pay, and then the Emperor said that for her sake he was ready to do anything. She couldn't understand his intentions, so she continued to stare at the corners of those beautiful eyes in silence. Kylos told Chloe that he was right, and for her the Emperor was ready to sell even the country. In the end, the Emperor divorced the Empress and gave up the eastern lands for that, although their area was not less than 3 ordinary domains. But Chloe still did not understand, and Kylos said that all men in love behave so recklessly and bravely. The girl thought that he behaved that way too, but he said that he didn't want to repeat his brother's fate, so he tried not to fall in love with anyone. She realized that he was willing to use even his own feelings for gain. Although Kylos had chosen the Marquis Rosalind to get the power of her family, but sometimes when she saw him with that lady, he looked so in love. But it was just a game, because Kylos was not reckless or brave when he was with the Marquis. Chloe also said that when she first saw the Emperor, she thought he was ugly and bossy like Kylos. But why did he fall in love with her? Uncle answered that he had just had it from birth. Uncle's face seemed so cold during the story, and she still didn't understand, because in her opinion, they both had everything they wanted. Looking at Chloe's belly, Kylos asked how many months were left before the baby was born, and the girl answered that it was less than 3 months. He also said that he was going to be very busy now, so he wouldn't be able to visit her for a while, and he hoped she understood that. Kylos walked over to her and his cold lips touched her forehead, though it was only a small kiss. But her cheeks immediately flushed, even the veins in his arms were drawing her in. He asked if she understood it. Chloe, trembling voice. Yes. The reasons for his busyness was connected with the wedding with the Marquis Rosalind. She knew nothing about it. When the child was born, it was not Kylos who came to Chloe, but the knight Brance who brought her a present from the Lord in a box with black diamond earrings. Brance looked sadly at Chloe and then turned to the child and said that he was an exact copy of Lady Garnesh. Of course, she bore the Emperor a child, but she could not become his wife, so she remained Lady Chloe Garnesh. Even the divorce from the Empress took almost 2 months, and it was still quick. And since many people were against her presence here, to take the place of the Empress would take much longer. Contrary to the stories she had heard, the newborn baby turned out to be completely ugly. A red little wrinkle in a word, he was a freak. Knight Brance had also said that he was small and cute, and that he was much like Lady Garnesh. She considered Knight Brance's words, and she could agree with him that this child was certainly not beautiful, but like the knight had said, he was very cute. Brance also said that it might have sounded rude, but that beauty in him reminded her a little of her. Then her cheeks flushed, and she didn't know why she was shy, but she wanted to look at the child all the time, and the way he was sleeping peacefully attracted her. But the knight was wrong, because if they were alike, this child would not be so cute. Chloe still thought it would be better if he was like the Emperor. Of course, he was always just a man in love, but he was clearly better than her. The more she thought about it, the more her thoughts returned to Kylos. It had been 3 months since their last meeting, and she missed him so much, she decided to ask the knight if her uncle was busy. Then the knight grew sad and said that he had gotten married last month, and now Marquis Elizabeth Rosalind was Princess Rudbihi. It was clear from the beginning that Kylos had long ago decided to get rid of the Emperor, so he was preparing the ground for it, and Chloe was just one of the points to it, and maybe Marquise Rosalind too. She was shocked and burned with shame. She even began to shake because she had not even prepared a gift. Though she was not destined to stand next to him, she wanted to be present at least during his wedding, and at this moment she wanted to congratulate him with a smile on her face. And that's what she thought from the moment she realized she loved him. Maybe that's why she was a little hurt. But since she said so, Brance was told to tell her that she was already the greatest gift in his life, and that's when Chloe realized that he already knew everything. Her favorite man was so cruel, and then Chloe said that being alive for her uncle gave her great joy. Even after Knight Brance left, she couldn't get over it. Of course, living for Kylos was the only meaning of her existence, but why were tears constantly flowing from her eyes? That was a question she wondered for the first time. Turning to Kylos, she thought that she should have died in the mud, but he saved her and gave her a new life, so she had to serve her benefactor for the rest of her life. Chloe loved him with all her soul, her only kin. She decided that she would definitely live for him, so she could not allow such feelings. Suddenly, her reasoning was interrupted by the baby's crying. She took the baby in her arms and couldn't understand what had happened, begging him not to cry while she was terrified. Kylos had taught her a few things, but most of them were necessary to win the Emperor's heart. He had not shown her how to handle children. So she took a bell and rang it and called the maids. And when they came, Chloe told them that the baby was crying and she didn't understand why. Unfortunately, the child had no nurse, and all the noble ladies were embarrassed by the origin of Chloe, so they did not want to deal with it, and to entrust the imperial child to anyone was also impossible. Then one of the maids thought that perhaps the child did not like the way the lady hugged him, and asked her to relax her shoulders. So Chloe gave the child to the maids. Sarah was now only 20 years old, but since there were 7 younger children in the family, she had to watch over them from childhood, and only after Chloe handed her the child, the room became quiet. Sarah turned to Mistress and showed her how the baby was smiling sweetly. In Sarah's arms, the baby smiled like a little angel. Although he was wrinkled, he didn't seem ugly now. Chloe looked at the baby, and from somewhere in the far corner of her soul came a warmth that was not the same feeling she felt when she looked at Kylos. It was the first time since her mother's death that she had someone other than Kylos, and she could confidently call this baby family. Chloe then took the baby in her arms and decided to name this fragile and little girl Estelle. Chloe started thinking about the name as soon as she got used to holding her in her arms. The emperor thought about how the name Estelle sounded, and then Chloe said that it was the name of the Queen of Fairies in one of the legends of their empire. The emperor was so sweetly pleased by this. After giving birth, Chloe hesitated for a while over the choice of name, but the emperor waited patiently and did not rush her. She thought of Kylos as her family, so she didn't think much about the baby, but she was attracted and filled with the warmth of this baby that she couldn't turn away from. The emperor looked at this child with such fondness that a strange feeling stirred in her soul. He was one of the few who caused Chloe incomprehensible emotions. But suddenly Kylos's voice rang in her head, and she remembered every word he said so clearly that she should never forget, that she should never be attached to the emperor. Kylos had told her that when the emperor had first sent a carriage for her. It was every man for himself in the palace, so she was not supposed to sympathize with the emperor. All this time, Chloe had been told that this man was evil and dangerous, but he was different, and it was confusing. But she could still feel Kylos repeating over and over again that she was not to be deceived, and that a man in love always wore a mask of innocence in front of his wife. She thought that maybe he was trying so hard to get it into her head because he foresaw the emperor's behavior, so she tried to follow Kylos's instructions. Suddenly, the emperor told Chloe that his brother was coming to visit them today, which would be the first time he and Chloe had met in 4 months. The emperor knew that now it was just words, but he was her guardian. He was supposed to come at once, but Chloe knew the reason why he did not do it. He was busy with the Marquis Elizabeth. Sometime after the emperor left, Kylos came and she had to hide her displeasure and meet him with dignity. When he came to Chloe, he told her how long they had not seen each other, and she told him how much she missed him. Then Kylos, with a sly smile, told her not to show such feelings to the emperor because he might not like them. He was as beautiful as ever. Chloe was so happy to hear his voice that she almost cried. Wiping her tears, Kylos said that he missed her too, but there were too many things to do, and there was no time to meet. Suddenly stroking her ear and tucking a strand of hair behind it, Kylos asked why she wasn't wearing the earrings he had sent her. The black diamond jewelry was valuable in itself, but sitting in them with the baby was uncomfortable, so she had to put them off. But to him, it was just a pathetic excuse. All of a sudden, he pulled away from Chloe and thought that during his absence she had become too fretful. Then Chloe felt resentful deep down and was filled with an unpleasant feeling. Kylos told her that when the weather improved, he would invite her to their estate, because it was empty without her, and it would be better if she took his brother with her. Kylos also added that now all the nobles, including the family of the last empress, namely Duchess Caroline, had turned their backs on the emperor, and after the birth, the conflicts between them had only worsened. Chloe knew nothing about it, because the emperor always smiled as if nothing was happening. And then Kylos said that it was time to cut off the emperor's head. Later, Chloe came to the emperor as Kylos had ordered her and told him that she wanted to go to Rudbihi Manor because that place was like a parental home for her and she wanted His Majesty to go there with her. Then he said that he would try to fulfill her request, and Chloe knew that it would not be easy for him. But she pretended not to understand, and 10 days after this conversation, they got into a carriage and went to the prince's estate. Chloe was going there for the first time in a year. Because of the fact that she was looking out the window all the time, the emperor realized how much she liked trains and how much she liked to watch the nature and views passing by the window. He sat across from her and did not avert his gaze, and this naive man was a gift to her favorite man. The emperor had not suspected anything before, but upon arriving at the manor, he sensed something amiss. As soon as they entered Rudbihi Manor, they were greeted by Kylos and called his guards. The emperor thought it was a very stupid trap, so he drew his sword and said that his brother could bring 100 soldiers, but they would not be able to defeat him. Then rage flashed in his scarlet eyes. Then Chloe remembered the rumors that once went about the emperor's hair scarlet like fire. It was the blood of the enemies he killed. Suddenly, Kylos was behind the emperor and Chloe held a knife to her, saying that now his brother had someone he wanted to protect. Then Chloe realized why Kylos had raised her to defeat the emperor. She didn't think Kylos would do it that way, and not just because it was cowardly, but because he would do anything to achieve his goal. She just thought that he would not rely on a method in which he would not be 100% sure of success, because the emperor was not a fool. He would not have put down his sword just to save her. Then Chloe wondered if the emperor would kill Kylos. Kylos told his brother to lower the sword, and then Chloe would live. The Emperor was furious and swore and told him to leave Chloe out of it. Then Kylos thought the Emperor was hesitant and began to move the blade of the sword across the girl's throat, cutting it. He also said that with every second she was in more danger. The Emperor was getting more and more angry that his beloved woman was in danger and he could do nothing about it. And the moment her throat was cut, the Emperor was attacked by Kylos's guards. Kylos's plan worked. The man was completely in love and had given up everything for just Chloe. The words Kylos kept repeating in a whisper kept going back and forth in her head endlessly. "You can't sympathize with the Emperor." Just like that, her consciousness left her completely. When Chloe woke up, she looked around and decided that nothing had changed. She touched her neck, and to make sure, she went to the mirror and saw a bandage that was soaked with blood. At that moment, Kylos came to her and asked if she was awake, and Chloe asked what was with the Emperor. Her uncle answered that he was now bound in the dungeon of the manor, but soon he would die. His voice sounded tired, and it sounded like he had been with the Emperor all this time. Suddenly he came to her, and lifting her face so that she looked into his eyes, he asked why she had such an expression. Chloe said that she felt a little strange, and Kylos thought that she felt sorry for the Emperor. He kept telling her that she couldn't sympathize with the Emperor, and that she had grown attached to him. But Chloe said that wasn't the case. It certainly wasn't sympathy. Compared to the Emperor, there were many more unhappy people in this world. Kylos touched her neck, and then she remembered how he had cut her neck with his sword. He thought it would probably leave a scar, and he didn't understand why she didn't say she was hurt. She couldn't say she was hurt because she felt like she had done something wrong, and her body tightened on its own. Kylos put his hands around her face and told her that it was all because of him, and as always, his cleverness would be rewarded. Then her anxiety at the mere sight of his smile melted away on its own. He wanted her to forget about the Emperor and make this place her home again. Every word tickled her face with warmth. It was finally over. Long, sad nights, fake smiles in the palace and all that. Lastly, Kylos took Chloe to the Emperor. He said that from the beginning she was just a bait for the Emperor. He was a cruel and terrible man, and she stood silently by his side, not at all different from him. After hearing that, he was relieved that his brother wouldn't kill her at least. It was so strange to Chloe, because his words sounded both sadness and tears at the same time. She wondered if he was angry with her. But if he said that he was not angry, it would be a lie, and yet now it was useless because she was crying because of him. Chloe saw in the eyes of the Emperor only the usual tenderness. The strongest man on the continent had lost everything for her, and yet he still loved her because his eyes told her so. Kylos wished he would stop this foolish complacency, because from the beginning this girl was only a doll for him, and it was only crocodile tears. Chloe wanted to have one last look at the Emperor, but Kylos's hands held her by the shoulders so tightly that she couldn't. She missed Estelle very much, and wanted to ask her uncle when she could see her. Kylos only looked at the girl tiredly, and then she said hysterically that the day he had promised her was over. Kylos held his head and thought out loud that he had a lot of things to finish, and he couldn't think about that, and he went over to the girl and told her to wait a little longer. Sometime later, Kylos became emperor as he wished all this time, and these two so casually stood next to each other and looked like a couple. Suddenly, Chloe's head was filled with bad thoughts. He only kept her around so he could be emperor. Kyle had raised her just to seduce his brother, but now she was no longer of any use to him, so she didn't know where to go or where there would be a place she could return to. The emperor is dead. Namely, the last emperor who chose a foolish death from love, Raymond de Lastaroth, and no matter how much Chloe waited, Estelle did not appear. The girl came to her uncle, but he already knew why, and told her to call him emperor. When she called him that, he changed his mind, and that she should call him just uncle as it was better. She pitifully told her uncle that she missed Estelle, but he was starting to get tired of it. She wanted to know where her daughter had been and asked him to bring her back. But then Kylos said she was fed up with him because he had heard that she had been eating badly and had come to see her even though he was busy, and she dared to talk to him about it. She asked her uncle because he had promised her that she would be able to see Estelle, and she had only to wait a little longer. But he could not understand what had gone wrong, for he had not taught her motherly love. His gaze was disappointed, and yet he told her not to sympathize with him, and Chloe cried when the emperor was dying. Chloe admitted that it was her mistake, and she was very guilty, and she still asked for Estelle back, and then Kylos thought that she had grown to care about that man's child. Kylos saw Chloe start to cry, and he let her go and walked past her while she screamed at him to bring her daughter back. After a while, Chloe sat by the window and hummed a lullaby and hoped that she liked her. It had been 2 months since she hadn't seen Estelle, and the girl was going crazy. Every day she sobbed and fell asleep in exhaustion and woke up in the morning in some other place, and there were some strange wounds on her body. Her body was terribly thin, and the doctor said she was sick from mental problems. Maybe Kylos couldn't stand to watch anymore, and that's why she finally took her to the imperial palace. Kylos, who she wanted to see but couldn't see all this time now, came to see her every day. She definitely should have been happy about it, but there was no happiness in her heart. He thought she looked like a broken doll and wondered when she would stop thinking about the baby. Now whatever she said made him angry, so she was afraid to talk. He didn't know what she needed, and he was starting to get so mad that he thought if he made her a baby she would stop crying. He thought she just needed a baby. Then he approached her and pressed her against him, and eventually took her by force. After the incident, he looked at her with distraught eyes and repeated that he had told her that when he put her in her brother's carriage, he was sorry because he had almost ruined their plan, and she had no idea how long he had endured it. Touching the scar on her neck, he went on to say that he didn't have to put up with it anymore, and perhaps it would have been better if he had been her husband instead of her uncle. But from her reaction, he realized that she probably didn't want it, and he thought that she would be happy, or like his brother, he had to promise that he would make her an empress. He thought that Chloe had changed a lot, but before she was a simple-minded girl. The crying girl told him that she didn't want anything. She just wanted him to let her see Estelle, and that was her only wish. The only thing Kylos told her was that he would call her to him tonight, and she had to be ready. Already in the evening, maids were telling her that it was getting close to time, and at came to her room and told Chloe that the emperor was waiting for her. He saw that she was sitting on the bed in despair and asked the maids to go out and leave alone. When the maids left the room, the knight turned to Lady Chloe Garnesh, but she immediately said that she would not go because she did not need the child. She just wanted to see Estelle. After that, there was silence between them, and Brun said that he would help her find the child, and a ray of hope appeared in her eyes. As they walked, Chloe remembered how he had accompanied her instead of Kylos, because it was the same hand. It was strange, but his presence calmed her, and she believed that she would see Estelle soon, and it took away her anxiety. They walked through the woods, not even on a path so that no one would notice them under the cover of night. And then Brance told Chloe to go ahead and led her to the tower where the guards were standing. But since she was the daughter of the past emperor, she was considered an illegitimate child, and Chloe had nothing to protect her. Brance asked her to wait near the tower and went to deal with the guards. When the knight stunned the guards, he came back for Chloe and led her into the tower. Inside the corridors, they met the rest of the guards, and Bruns dealt with them as well as with those who were at the entrance. They climbed the stairs and walked straight down the hallway and came to the right bedroom where the light was on. When Chloe went in there, she saw her little Estelle lying on the big bed and felt better when she could take her little girl in her arms and hold her against her chest. Bruns warned Chloe that they had to leave soon, and she quickly left the room with the baby in her arms. It was cold enough in the tower as they walked that steam was coming out of their mouths, and the baby's cheeks were cold. Chloe's body was so weak that it was very hard to run, so they moved slowly. When they got almost to the exit, Brance asked her to wait, and just as they thought they would be out of there soon, Brance opened the door, and Kylos was behind it. He stood there waiting for them. He knew that sooner or later Chloe would come for the baby, and when the door was fully open and Kylos walked in to meet them, the knights ran in after him, and part of them ran to Chloe to take the baby away, and the rest went to hold Brance. That was the end of it. She never saw little Estelle or the knight Brance helping her again. Then Kylo locked Chloe in her room, and after a while the Marquis came to her saying she didn't even look human anymore. Then Kylos didn't come to see her for over 2 weeks because he was busy with business. Chloe mumbled about the baby and asked the Marquise to help her see Estelle. The Marquise looked at her with pity and calmly handed her a vial of liquid. In the next second, she smiled and told the girl that if she drank it, she could go to her dear child. Chloe took the vial and realized that she didn't even need to ask to find out what it was. Then she realized that it meant only that little Estelle was no longer in this world. But even after that realization, Chloe's tears didn't even flow. She had already cried all she could during those months, weeks, and days. The Marquise mockingly said that the Emperor was soft-hearted, but she told him that the used dog had to be gotten rid of in time, and yet it was very lucky that she would be able to get rid of her before the baby was born. After that, Chloe opened the bottle without thinking and drank the contents in a gulp. In her head, she heard a baby crying and scarlet blood flooded her dress. The Marquise had been sitting across from her the whole time, watching her die. Pain radiated throughout her body and misery clouded her judgment. Kylos had been right a long time ago. Something had broken in her. Probably the moment he'd found Chloe near the burned mansion, when he'd told her she was alone and offered to go with him. When Chloe asked why he saved her, he said that he saved her because she was beautiful. The girl thought that this man was attracted to everything beautiful, but it was not so his brother liked everything beautiful. At 12, she didn't understand much, but this was the first ray of light she saw. The servants in the fortress said that he was the illegitimate son of the past emperor, and his brother was the only one who could take the place of the ruler. But for Chloe, this fact did not change anything, prince or emperor, it was all too far away. Once Chloe was hiding, and Kylos found her behind the bushes, because at that time she liked to run away from lessons, because she didn't like to learn letters, it was hard and tiresome. Kylos hired this man for her, and it made him sad, but the girl didn't understand why someone like her would want to learn letters. Kylos explained to her that she might need it, and people usually prepared for the future in advance. But Chloe still didn't want to learn. Then her uncle asked if she would study with him. Of course he was a busy man, but he could spare time for her. But the girl did not understand why, and her uncle answered her because he liked her. She wanted to know exactly what it was that he liked her for, and even thought it was because his brother liked her looks. Then Kylos shook his head and said he just thought she was cute. She still hadn't recovered from the time when she was the Garnish family pet, but even Chloe was made to blush by those words about sweet little Chloe. She heard a voice calling her sweet Chloe, naive Chloe. She loved someone so much who was not familiar with the feeling that she had crossed the point of no return. Tears of sorrow will become warm rain to pour on the cold ground. Chloe, Chloe, unhappy Chloe, the child who needed love now resisted the passage of time. Endless sadness would become a hungry beast and consume this sad world. Suddenly, a flash of light appeared from nowhere, and Chloe began to hear a familiar voice calling her name. Sad love and terrible fate, cruel pain, naive Chloe. The girl abruptly opened her eyes and woke up in her bed. No matter how many times she closed her eyes and opened them again in front of her, was that man Kylos. He had rescued her from the mud, and at the end of it all, he had plunged her back into the same mud again. The man she loved with all her body and soul. Kylos looked at Chloe with worry and thought she looked completely sick. For some reason, Chloe was filled with a sense of pleasure. She was horrified to realize that she had a sense of satisfaction towards Kylos because he was her sanctuary that she couldn't resist. He had rescued her from the Garnish family, her savior and benefactor, and not only that, he was her favorite man. Something inside her had been broken, and he had shown her for the first time how to appreciate and pay attention to others, and also what love was. Her gaze made Kylos uncomfortable, and he shuddered and asked if she was still sick. Chloe realized that she couldn't have been. In fact, Kylos had been so careful with her, and her deathbed memories had been twisted in some strange way. The doctor who was standing with Kylos told the gentleman that the girl's fever had noticeably gone down. Then Chloe realized that this man was the doctor who had been watching her when she got pregnant with Estelle. Chloe thought it was a memory of when she first met Estelle, but there were a lot of things that didn't add up. Most importantly, her pregnancy had pleased none other than Kylos, and she still remembered the night her pregnancy was confirmed. It was the first time he'd ever held her in his arms like that, and he couldn't believe she'd actually done it. Kylos had always believed in her, and he was sure that one day she would be so successful. Chloe was so happy to be able to help her uncle. That's how happy her pregnancy was for Kylos. Kylos put his hand to her forehead and made sure she had a fever that had already subsided. He also said that the girl still looked bad, and he hoped it wouldn't be a big deal. Chloe was so strange since the doctor had definitely finished examining her, But he still hadn't told Kylos about her pregnancy, and it couldn't be since the doctor had been working for Kylos for a long time, and he knew what Kylos wanted most, so he wouldn't hold back the news of her pregnancy. Her uncle couldn't understand why she wouldn't tell him, because if she was in pain, he wanted her to tell him. It looked as if he really cared for her. Of course it was a pleasant obsession, but in reality there could be nothing of the sort, for he was always concerned only that there should be no damage to his brother's priceless gift. It was like a merchant worrying about the safety of his fine merchandise, and her illness was of no consequence to him. It seemed that something like this had happened a long time ago. For once she had been very ill, so much so that she had been delirious all night and couldn't even sleep. Her throat was so sore that she couldn't even swallow a spoonful of soup, and she couldn't sit up to take her medicine because of the pain. She couldn't even say the name of the one she loved all this time. That was how badly she felt. But the saddest part was that she couldn't see him. When Kylos had time, he would go to visit the poor thing. But gradually the number of visits decreased because Lady Rosalind didn't like it so much. Kylos already thought she couldn't talk, but he wanted her to say something and covered her hand with his, but she pulled away from him at the same moment. It wasn't exactly in her memories, because she'd wished for it so much that it must have just entered her memory. But what she'd wished for on the brink of death was similar nonsense. She thought it was all too real to think it was the next step after death. Then she told them to leave the room, and as soon as Kylos called her name, she was already screaming for them to leave now. Never, ever had she yelled so hard at her uncle, so it wasn't like the kaleidoscope of memories she had seen after death. And when she said that, she realized a terrible chill filled her entire body. The sensation at her fingertips became more and more apparent, the one who had drowned her in the mud, the one she loved with all her body and soul. She saw him, and an endless emptiness filled her. Their eyes met, and she saw him wince. Chloe just sat crying in her bed, and Kylos stood beside her and asked her why she was crying. He thought she was crying because she was very sick. Chloe was curious why she was crying and why he kept asking her those questions, because she had told him to leave. She apologized to her uncle and said she just wanted to be alone for a while. As much as Kylos didn't want to stay and hear what went wrong and why her mood had changed so much, he left. But before he left, he said that he would come again later, and that if anything bothered her, she could ring the bell. It was only after the day was over that she was able to look at the situation with a cold eye, and she thought that Kylos had saved her after she had poisoned herself with the Empress's poison. Her last memory was of him locking her in his bedroom, and then the Empress came and brought the poison, and Chloe figured the doctor was there for the same reason, however something didn't add up. First of all, Kylos, who should be in the palace, was in Rudbihi Manor. Of course, it was probably because the Empress hated her, and if he wanted to hide Chloe secretly, it was clear why she was here. However, he is the Emperor, and now he has the most worries because he became the ruler only recently. That's why it was inexplicable that he left the imperial palace for so long for her. Secondly, the doctor called Kylos Lord, but that was a nickname from the past when he was still just a prince. Of course, he ordered her to continue calling him uncle, but if others called him anything other than Emperor, which he was so eager to do, it sounded like a nail on glass to him. Even though he tried to create a soft and gentle image, Kylos was always strict about his position and would never forgive anyone who made a mistake in that regard, and suddenly, here he was. Now that he had become emperor, did he really have any magnanimity? Kylos handed her a glass and said that the medicine had to be drunk even if she didn't want to. Only then she could get better. Just before she'd almost died from drinking the poison, Kylos's eyes had been filled with nothing but pity and boredom. At least, she'd thought so. But now there was a tenderness in his gaze that had been there a long time before. She kept staring at the glass and couldn't understand why it was like this, if he could ever need her again. Chloe didn't know for sure, but Kylos decided to tell her that she had a terrible fever, so she had to understand that he was just worried that she wouldn't get sick again. As she drank the medicine, she wondered why he might need her this time. All she had was a pretty face, and in that case he probably had another beauty-loving enemy, and now he was going to send Chloe to him. Again, he had to seduce someone, sleep with someone, have a baby. Chloe got disgusted at the thoughts, and then she vomited from the drugs and the thought of it. All that dirt she had inside her came out and stained his suit, but she didn't see anything. It wasn't her that was dirty, it was that man. This scoundrel, he only pretended that he loved her, that he was sweet and gentle. This man who wore a mask deceived her and plunged her into the mud, used her love, sent her to seduce his brother, and in the end even took her child. At that moment, something inside Chloe finally broke. Kylo sat beside her and worriedly asked if she was okay. He told her not to cry and to try to breathe slowly. He pretended to care about her again, to support her so that when she heard his voice, she felt nauseous again. She looked at him, though he had a seductive face, but he was a scumbag. Beautiful scumbag radiating tenderness, and Chloe was so stupid she realized it too late. The doctor listened and examined Chloe and said that her body was fine. Then Kylos objected because she hadn't even swallowed the medicine and everything inside her had come out too. Then the doctor said that her temperature and pulse were back to normal, and it seemed to him that it wasn't her body, but that the problem was somewhere else. After that, Kylos ordered everyone out of the room. Chloe was seething inside every time she looked at Kylos, so she lowered her gaze so she couldn't see him. He could see that she was having a hard time, and it looked like she was having such a hard time that both her body and soul couldn't take it. He didn't even listen when she was yelling how bad she felt, and how she wanted to see Estelle so she couldn't understand why he was talking to her like that now. Kylos lowered his head and said that it was his fault and he had misjudged everything. He reached out his hand to the girl. When he wanted to stroke her head, she shrank back. Poor Chloe. How great was her shock that he had brought her such a precious girl. He was the one who broke her, the bastard who took Estelle. Instead of those stupid words, he should have returned her to Chloe at once, or at least the corpse of her poor child. Now he wished he and Chloe could stop all this now so he and she could stop all this. He got out of bed, and getting down on one knee, he took her hand and told her it was because she was very sick. Chloe couldn't understand what he was up to this time. She told her uncle that she had no idea what he was talking about, and Kylos replied that she didn't need to try to seduce the Emperor anymore, and that was what he was trying to say. He mumbled something about how he really didn't know that one night with the Emperor would affect her so much. The girl didn't know what he was talking about. Did she think he was talking about his dead brother, calling him Emperor? At that moment, a butler entered the room to tell the gentleman that the Marquise was waiting for him. It was the old butler of the Rudbiggy estate, named Erickson. After her night with the Emperor when winter came, he could not survive it, and died of a lingering illness. The girl wondered what it couldn't have been, and how he had ended up here in the first place. Kylos remembered telling the Marquise to leave, but Erickson said that she had replied that she wasn't going to leave until she saw her lord. Marquise had been looking to see him since the New Year's festival, so she looked quite worried. Holding his head, Kylo said that apparently words didn't work on this woman and asked Erickson to tell her again to leave, and he was too busy right now. The girl couldn't come to terms with the impossible reality of the situation. Erickson was definitely dead, but now he was standing in front of her alive, and the one who was supposed to be in the imperial palace was in the Rudbighy estate, and he was also an emperor, and now he was a lord again, and the empress was a marquis. And there was only one time when she felt as bad as she does now. Yes, it was the day after she spent the night with the Emperor for Kylos. And the only difference was that Kylos, who rarely came to the girl so as not to disturb the Marquise, was now by her side. And then she realized that it wasn't just that she drank the poison and didn't just get very sick. Shouldn't she have died in the first place? All she had experienced was just suffering inside a nightmare delusion of a night with the Emperor that she had been forced into, and then called the Emperor's mistress, and pointed the finger at, and Estelle, the little Estelle, who was infinitely important to her. It just couldn't be Estelle's nightmare. As soon as she thought of her poor child, her heart ached. Chloe jumped out of bed and raced past Kylos straight to the mirror and saw that the cut on her neck was gone. Her favorite man, Kylos, had left a scar on her neck that was now completely gone, taking the pain with it. Kylos gingerly asked what was wrong with Chloe, but without waiting for an answer, he just walked over to her and hugged her. But because the last time he had stood behind her and hugged her, but had slit her throat, Chloe was disgusted by his touch. She also remembered how he had said that she just wanted a child, how he had said that when he had put her in his brother's carriage, he had felt sorry for her, and had almost ruined their plan. She was shaking from those unpleasant heartbeats. Such clear sensations could not be just a dream, and it could not be just an illusion. Chloe's mind rewound all the events from the moment when the Marquis entered the bedroom and gave her the poison to the moment when Kylos killed the Emperor and took away her child. to the moment when she gave birth and became pregnant with Estelle, and to the moment when she found out about the pregnancy. That's when the girl realized it was a coup and time had turned back. So she realized she had gone back in time, but her mind couldn't take it all in. First she died, and then suddenly she was reborn. It took her a long time to get her head around all these events. She had gone back in time after her death, or rather, she had gone back one day after her first night with Emperor Raymond. She didn't understand why her mind was still a mess right now, but the situation was slowly making sense. A completely unfounded story about going back in time, but she wasn't stupid enough to say it out loud. She decided to give herself time to look around and get used to it. She thought about what she should do and told her uncle that he was supposed to go to Lady Marquis Rosalind, but Kylos was stopped by the fact that she wasn't feeling well. And how could she go to someone else in that case? If the Marquis found out that he was with Chloe, she would be angry. But Kylos thought that it was not important now because her condition had worsened during the night, and he was afraid that she might die. She had definitely experienced this moment in the past, but what was happening was a little different from her memories. First of all, his look has changed now he was worried only about her. Chloe knew that Lady Marquise needed her uncle, but he claimed that he did not need her as much as Chloe. The girl said she was just sick and she wasn't going to die. He wanted her to stop worrying about Lady Rosalind. He wanted his beautiful Chloe to stop thinking about silly things and focus on recovering. His voice was so gentle she wondered if what was happening was real. He always touched her lips before kissing her. It was their special sign. But as she looked at him, she noticed the mark on his neck and remembered the day she had entered his room after the Marquise had left him. His body was still warm from the past passion, and it was proof that he had been with that woman during her night with the Emperor. Frankly speaking, after that night, she was sick almost to the point of death. Her body and soul was filled with pain, especially the fact that he was happy without even knowing about her pain. She put her hands out in front of her to keep him away. She was completely different from her past self because of the traces of that woman, and she couldn't accept the kiss. Just thinking about it made her clench. Then Kylos touched her neck, realizing why she reacted the way she did. He apologized to her for that, but at that moment she called him a bastard, and he was very surprised and even thought he was imagining it, and asked her what she had just said. She realized that she had shouted her real thoughts without realizing it, and said in her defense that it was because she was sick and she wasn't herself, and Kylos believed it. He told her that she was in a terrible state, and Chloe agreed with him and thought that she needed more time to get back to normal. In fact, she really wanted him out of the room. She said that she would prefer to rest alone, and she wished he would go to Lady Rosalind, for in that time Chloe could recover completely. He really didn't want to leave her alone, but since she asked for it, he left her. When Kylos left, she sank down, and at that moment Erickson came and brought her tea and asked if the lady was all right, and Chloe looked up and smiled at him and said that everything was all right. Erickson also said that the gentleman was very worried about her, and it was the first time in 20 years that he had seen the gentleman so confused. Chloe did not dare to ask him about his health. He looked fine now, but his illness would not allow him to survive this year, and she had already seen it. Erickson said that because of his age, his appearance left much to be desired, and then Chloe decided to ask him what day it was, and Erickson, supporting her, said that there was a festival in honor of New Year, and then she was sick, and today was the 3rd of January. After the night with the Emperor, she had a high fever, but she didn't call the doctor. Then she was afraid it would look like she wanted to get her uncle's attention. Thinking back, she had been feverish for a long time, but now she had recovered in just a day. She realized that something had changed during her teleportation. After that, the Emperor's carriage was arriving, and if she really went back in time, then in about 2 weeks, the Emperor's carriage would be at their fortress again, and then she would be able to find out everything. But if the Emperor would really send the carriage, Chloe did not know what to do. But she knew one thing: she did not have to end up like in the past. She wondered if she should have stayed away from him, but if she went through with Kylos's plan again, she would seduce the Emperor again, give birth to a child, and lead him to his death. In the time she returned to Estelle had not yet been taken by the man. Soon, Erickson interrupted her thoughts and asked if she was all right. Then she said with a smile that she was just a little tired and would feel better after a nap. Erickson was about to leave as Chloe suggested that if he was having a hard time, he could go back to his homeland and rest, because this winter would be quite cold. It was her last concern for old Eriksson, who was always friendly and caring. Eriksson turned around and said that for him, Rudbyhe Castle was the home of his soul. However, he did not accept Chloe's offer. One winter afternoon, there was a meeting between Chloe and the Marquis Rosalind, but it was pure chance. She teased the girl, saying that she thought she was an empress after spending the night with the emperor. Chloe remembered how Kylos asked her not to anger the Marquis. The first conversation about this woman had shaken her to the core, and that was probably the reason, because when she met her, Chloe shrank and shrank. This woman was important to Kylos, so she was not afraid of her, but of his anger. The Marquise thought that the girl looked normal and wondered what she could be sick, or maybe she just wanted to attract the attention of the Lord, but if she had not overdone it. Perhaps it was hard to travel in time, but in Chloe suddenly woke up the spirit of confrontation. Suddenly he will hate her, and maybe he will not. Will it change anything because her Estelle is not back? At that moment, Chloe cried. The Marquise wanted her to stop because people might think that she was hurting the girl. Suddenly, someone told Marquise to stop, and then Chloe looked up in front of her and recognized that back. Now the future seemed very distant to her, but she remembered the back of the man who held her hand firmly and led her forward, and together they went into the deep darkness. But she believed that at the end of this darkness there was a ray of light waiting for her, and she was led to it by the faint light that was in front of her. The Marquise asked indignantly what she should have stopped, for she had done nothing wrong and this girl had set her up. It was Knight Bruns who stood between them, shutting Chloe out, and said that Lady Garnish needed rest. But the Marquis was curious as to where the lady was ill, for she had come here in this weather and was walking about without any trouble. She wondered how they really didn't realize that Chloe was just trying to draw attention to herself. Of course, Brantz had Kylos's trust, but it was reckless to get in the woman's way, and she was about to stop Brantz when suddenly someone shouted her name in a concerned voice. It was Kylos who grabbed Chloe's hand and wanted to make sure that she was okay, because the doctor said that she needed rest, and he wanted to know why she had come here. He wanted to visit her, and there was no one in the room, so he got worried and hoped she wasn't in pain. Suddenly, he was interrupted by Marquise calling him Kyle. Chloe knew that Marquise could call him that, but Chloe couldn't. He turned irritably to Marquise and asked her what she had just called him, and then she apologized to him because they had agreed that the name would not leave the bedroom. It was just that the Marquise's memories of New Year's Eve night were so vivid that she had completely forgotten and said it. The girl realized that the Marquise had done it on purpose just to spite her. Suddenly, the girl was hurt by the way Kylos squeezed her hand. He told the Marquise that she should have refrained from such nonsense, and that everyone in the manor was busy with business at the moment, so he wanted to see her later. His cold voice made her whole body go cold, and it was the first time she had seen him like that. She wondered what kind of trouble he was talking about, because according to her memories, everything had been calm in the manor. Everyone had been happy, including Kylos, since the emperor had taken an interest in her. The Marquise could not believe what the Lord was saying because they had not seen each other for 3 days. At the same moment, Kylos asked Enoch Brantz what he was doing here, for he had been ordered to go to the capital. Brantz got down on one knee and said that he had just returned and that he had reported back to Rudbyhe Manor. Kylos, on the other hand, apologized and said that he had another task for him. He was to escort the Marquis Rosalind to her castle. When he gave this order, Brantz led the Marquise away, and Kylos and Chloe could hear how she was indignant and shouted at him that he couldn't do that to her. Kylos ignored her and led Chloe into the room. Already in the room, Kylos covered her with a blanket and said that if she wanted, she could call him by his name. He let her do that so she could call him Kylos. The girl wanted to know what he wanted to say. Then Kylos answered that the Marquise had called him by his name, and he thought it was because of that Chloe was upset. She was surprised because she had never thought of anything like that, and she decided to tell him that it was okay and that it was okay to call her uncle by his name. He asked why not, since his blood ties to the Garnish family had weakened long ago, and he thought it was strange that she called him uncle. Then she asked what she should call him, and he repeated his name. She blushed in horror and asked how someone like her could call her uncle by his name, to which he exhaled heavily and said that he didn't understand her position, but that she was more important to him than some Marquise. She remembered that he'd never said that to her because she was just a creature that Kylos had raised for his own needs. just bait to get rid of his brother. That's why, despite her feelings, she had never hoped for reciprocity, or rather she couldn't, but it was Kylos himself who had sealed it in the 17-year-old girl's brain. He was still sitting on the edge of the bed next to her and said that he felt like he had changed. And it was amazing, because it seemed that Kylos thought the same thing. But was it possible? Because Chloe thought that he had changed a little. She was sick, and that was probably why she seemed a little different. Then Kylos said that if he had known that she would be so bad, he would have paid more attention to her. All the while, she was not just smiling back at him, but watching him, and noticing that the corners of his eyes had lengthened suspiciously, and that was what caught her attention, because he had always deceived her with his false tenderness. But maybe the corners of his eyes were lying now too. She turned her head away from him and said that he preferred more formal addresses, but her uncle took her hand and said he didn't mind if she called him by his name. Chloe decided to ask him if it was an order, and he asked if he had ever ordered her, and the girl said that it had never happened. He never did it openly, but only brainwashed her for a long time so that she could fulfill any requests when she fell in love. Even the plan to seduce Emperor Kylos had asked if I would do it for him under the pretext that I should do it only for him. Then the man looked away, and still holding her hand replied that it was only a request. They were silent for a while without looking at each other, and then the man brought her hand to his lips and asked her to think if he could hear his name from her once. She would have liked to ask him why he was talking like that, but it would have been strange to spill her heartache on him, because she didn't want to reveal her secrets right now. At the door, Erickson called the gentleman, and when he was allowed to enter, he said that a carriage had been sent from the imperial palace. Chloe got up from the bed and thought that it couldn't be because it should be about 10 days, or maybe when she was sick, the carriage left empty. But no, Kylos would send her to the emperor even if she was sick, and it would not be forced, and she was just a fool who fulfills any of his requests. Of course she was feeling better, but did she have to go to the emperor? She had done something terrible to him. Suddenly, Kylos said that Chloe was not feeling well, so she could not go anywhere, and asked Erickson to send the carriage back. Then, Chloe ventured to ask why he had sent the carriage back, and he repeated that he had done so because she was not feeling well. Then the girl said that she might well have gone out, but Kylos knew that the doctor had said that she needed rest. At this present, her mood had completely soured. She thought her body was pathetic, and how it could suddenly become more important than Kylos' future just couldn't be true. Before this time replay, his Chloe body didn't care at all. The man thought she was saying some pretty sad things, and she shouldn't have devalued herself like that. He wanted them to end it all because he didn't know her pain, and it wasn't just words to comfort her. He wanted to know if she could believe him. Of course, the girl thought it was just another deception, but what was going on was beyond reason. Kylos saw Chloe's tears flowing and wiping them away. He wanted to know why she was crying, but suddenly she threw away his hand and looked at him more hostile. Chloe thought that he couldn't treat her like that. Of course he would worry about her because she was a bait for the emperor, but the man who forgot about her future cared about her was not Kylos. Then she made up her mind and said she would go to the emperor, but he kept saying that she was still sick, and then she asked him what difference it made to go now or later. She saw that now his actions were in complete contradiction to the past, but she was not going to forget the pain she and Estelle had endured before she had even set foot on their land. She screamed at him to stop. It wasn't the same thing and wasn't her job to seduce the emperor. She enjoyed looking at his face twisted in pain. Kylos repeated that they could end it with absolutely everything. He had never shouted at her before, even if she disobeyed him, but now he had just raised his voice at her, even though he had always kept his cool and considered the dignity of the imperial family the most important thing. He had never yelled at anyone before. Then she turned to her uncle and asked him if he thought it was strange. He was behaving very differently than in the past. He said that she needed to get a little healthier because his beautiful brother didn't like thin people. The emperor's mother was a princess of the Ibran country, so she had to learn their language. Kylos noticed that Chloe had a new perfume that suited her, but his brother wouldn't like it, so he was going to buy a new one so that she could captivate his heart with her scent. He also thought that she had beautiful hair, and he kept it only because of it, for the emperor liked beauties with silver locks. He was upset when he saw the wounds on her body, for she was a priceless treasure to his brother. Kylos had bred her to the emperor's standards, and of course she knew that all his gifts had a price. He told her their feelings were mutual, as she would soon bring him the emperor's head, so how could he not love her? She could not overcome her feelings, though she remained only his bait, and as a reminder of her role he repeated every time that she had to bear a child to the emperor. Now Chloe's past and present events mixed in her head and awakened a fiery spark in her. The man said he didn't even think her words were rude. He had never put himself on the same level as Chloe, and then suddenly he spoke wearing the mask of a living person. He also said that it was because he realized it too late. Chloe thought that if to compare the behavior of people in the past and now, only Kylos had changed. The girl wondered what he had realized. His eyes suddenly shone and fixed on her, and taking her hand, he said he loved her. A click, and her head abruptly went cold, and her heart beat at breakneck speed. A moment later, she pushed the man she loved, and who had just confessed his feelings to her, away from her and ran out of the room. Kylos ran after her and grabbed her arm, asking her to stop. The girl turned to him and reminded him that only 3 days ago he had spent the night with the Marquise, and 4 days ago he had sent her to the emperor. She laughed and said he was not allowed to fall in love with her. She thought it was a lie, and by his action he had robbed her of her love and several unhappy lives. She saw the doors open from the manor and saw the carriage standing in the courtyard and thought she had to escape. She had to get out of here, and this carriage was her only chance. Kylo shouted to the guards to stop Chloe, and they put their swords in front of her, but she saw the carriage pulling away, and then she decided to break through. But they warned her to be careful, because one wrong move and she would get hurt. Kylos was in time and hugged Chloe to prevent what could have happened, but he hurt himself. And then the guards asked the gentleman if he was all right, and he in turn asked if Chloe was hurt. Her suspicions now only grew stronger as Kylos changed as she did. From that moment on, she knew everything Kylos was going to say because she had the same question in her head about the current unchanged time. Only they had changed, but he could also go back in time. In this world, only Kylos's feelings for her were incongruous, of course, so there was no reason why he should have fallen in love with her. So all his tenderness, she thought, was nothing more than a lie. Perhaps he wanted to perfect everything, or perhaps something had come up after her death that needed intervention. But she didn't know that, because death awaited her in the future. At dinner time, she got up from the table and Kylos noticed that she hadn't eaten anything, which she explained by saying that she had no appetite. He didn't react to her impolite behavior, so her confidence grew each time she asked him, though the proof was more important to her, and the easiest way was to ask him in person. But it could have easily failed, because if it failed, her position would have been shaken, and he wasn't obligated to tell her the truth. The fact that he didn't ask her anything and only made her suffer in ignorance was for the same reason. She wondered what she would do if it were true. It didn't matter to her that he had trampled her feelings into the dirt. It was just that he had taken her girl, and that was something she would never be able to forgive. When she got to the window, she decided to open it and enjoy the fresh night air and saw Knight Brance below. They greeted each other, and despite these pleasantries, neither of them thought the night was peaceful, as they had nothing more to exchange but an awkward silence. Brance was a knight of the Rudbehi Palace, who was much favored by the capital's hustlers. She'd never even realized he was handsome, because in the past, she'd hardly ever looked at him, even though everyone around her looked at him and talked about his beauty. But for her, it was only Kylos. If you think about it, Knight Brance, like the Emperor, made her feel something strange. He had reached out to her, and in return, she had received only misery. When Kylos found them in the tower from which they had taken Estelle, Chloe had seen Brance for the last time, and that moment was particularly memorable for her. One day, her uncle decided to talk to Chloe about him. He wanted to know what she had said to Enoch Brance, or whether she had decided to seduce him as well as the Emperor. These words seemed to her the most apt for Knight Brance's fate, but she thought that such a thing would only make him angrier. He was very cruel. Even such false courtesy could not hide it, and having lost everything she had only to endure his anger. She didn't know what happened to Knight Brance afterward, as it was their last meeting. Brance told the lady that he had heard some noise and he asked if she was hurt, and then the girl said that she was all right. Come to think of it, she was wondering why he wasn't there. It was strange, though Knight Brance was a commoner, but his abilities were amazing, and Kylos trusted him immensely, so he took him with him everywhere, and all his secret thoughts were done with Knight Brance's sword. But the question remained, why the knight suddenly stopped being around him? Or was it because of something that happened in the future? It hadn't happened yet, so Knight Brance was definitely needed by Kylos right now. For a moment, Chloe thought the air warmed, and looking at that fleeting smile, she thought why he had helped her. After all, it had cost him his life. She wanted to, but couldn't ask. 2 days later, Kylos came to see Chloe. She wanted to know what he wanted to talk to her about, but the man reminded her that they could see each other just like that, and he also came because he missed her. But the girl noticed he'd never done that before. She sounded like a girl in transition, and even she found it uncomfortable. Then he decided it was like he needed to come more often so she would get used to it. All the noble girls nicknamed him the Duke Seducer for that smile. She looked away from him and said that if he had something to do with her, he could just order it. She was always waiting for him in that garden, but he always ended up there in someone else's arms. The man was surprised and didn't understand what she was talking about, and then Chloe said that he wanted to seduce her now, and didn't that say something about his intentions? Then, holding his head, he asked her to wait, and asked her why she thought that he loved her. So he wanted to love her to get her favor, but from her words, he was now offended. Then she was going to address her uncle, but he interrupted her with his name, and reminded her that they had agreed that she would call him by his name. Chloe told Mr. Kylos that he had seduced countless ladies with that smile. Now she admitted that she wanted to hurt Kylos as much as possible. Sometime in the distant past, Chloe told her uncle that she had one man from whom she wanted to receive attention, and the thought of him brought joy. But at times there was some heaviness in her chest, and sometimes tears even appeared in her eyes. Then her uncle told her that it was called love, and it was as if she had fallen in love with this man. At that moment, she wondered if it was love like her uncle said. Kylos also said that she didn't need it now, but it would be nice to experience something like that once, as long as it didn't hurt too much. The man also added that love is when you want your beloved to be happy no matter what, and if he needs help, you should do everything you can to help him, even sacrificing yourself. Only then it could be called love. He also thought that maybe one day there would be a person who wanted happiness only for him. Chloe wondered if that was when her sympathy for him turned into what was called love. Then she wondered if there were feelings of wishing a person unhappiness, and Kylos answered that such a feeling was called hatred. His words had left a strange imprint on her mind, and through it, she had learned love and hate. Now Kylos saw that Chloe was a little different, and it was hard to explain. Chloe had loved him so much, so how come there was nothing left but hatred? Suddenly, their conversation was interrupted, and it was Erikson who informed the Lord that the Emperor's carriage had arrived again. Kylos was surprised, because who would have thought that he would send the carriage again in the morning? He ordered the butler to send it back, but the butler hesitated, and Kylos asked what had happened, and Erikson said that it was the Emperor himself. Neither Kylos nor Chloe expected that. Then he was going to take her away, saying that he couldn't show her to the Emperor. But Kylos didn't have time to take the girl away, and Emperor Raymond del Astaroth entered the room. Kylos' hateful brother, who had foolishly fallen in love with her, an unhappy man. She thought about him a lot, especially remembering that last moment. The Emperor greeted Chloe and decided to see how she was feeling. For him, it had only been 4 days, but she heard his voice for the first time in months, and those first words expressed concern for her. The Emperor wanted to know if she had been sick during the New Year festival, but when he saw her tears, he shuddered. His face twisted strangely, as if he wanted to grab her right now and find out why she was crying. Kylos stood between them and told the Emperor that Chloe was not feeling well right now. The Emperor knew it himself, and he was furious to the point where the veins in his neck were swelling. He told his brother that that was why he had come to see Chloe in person. Kylos visibly tensed up and told His Majesty that he wanted a little more courtesy and suggested that he go to the reception hall. The Emperor didn't understand why it wasn't a good place for him. He had come to meet Chloe and not his brother, so Kylos shouldn't have kicked him out of here and decided that Kylos should leave. Kylos kept saying that what Chloe needed now was peace, but the Emperor interrupted him and ordered him to stop. It was as if she hadn't told Kylos about their relationship, and Raymond thought it wasn't hard to guess why he'd sent the carriage here. The look directed at his brother was soft and cold, but the hand on Chloe's shoulder was clenched with anger. Raymond said that he should have left this room. Now it was Kalos, the prince of the Rudbehe family. For a second, the room was filled with icy silence, and only a while later his hand fell from Chloe's shoulder. Kylos agreed, and asked him not to keep her for too long, because she was really sick. Raymond told his brother not to worry because they had already shared so much. When they were alone, he went over and wiped the tears on her face with his rough palms. When he said hello to her, Chloe couldn't hold back her tears again and began to cry and shiver at his voice and touch. Raymond Del Astaroth was a very strange man. Both in the past and in the present for Chloe, he remained just like that and wished her happiness more than anyone else. Perhaps it was to him that her feelings were more like love. Chloe told Raymond that if it was hard for him, he did not need to make so much effort to make her happy. He thought that it was impossible, and he did not want to leave her as a simple lover. In the distant past, she had no interest in the position of wife and smiled warmly and discouraged him. She said that it was enough for her to be a simple mistress because he loved her, and that was the main thing. They could always be together, so she did not think that their relationship was very bad even now. For him it was, of course, but she could be pointed at and it bothered him. She told him with a smile that it didn't matter to her, and she didn't think the relationship would last long, so she didn't think the worry was necessary, but she didn't know how to object, so she answered vaguely. Raymond did not want her to feel sad, for he wished only happiness for her. A similar but sadder voice now sounded above her head. He said he only wanted her to be happy. Only after a long tantrum did she manage to come to her senses. Raymond asked if she always cried like that. She hadn't realized when they were in bed. He decided to ask the reason why she cried like that. And then the girl wondered. He thought that maybe it was because she really felt so bad, but Chloe with a smile said that she just didn't feel well, though it seemed to her that her body was already fine, but the reason for her tears she didn't understand. Raymond asked when she got sick, and the girl said that it happened 3 days ago, and the man thought that it happened just after they spent the night together and hoped that she was not sick because of him. The girl reassured him and told him that it was definitely not because of him. With a little thought and a smile, the emperor pulled away from her, saying that he understood how she was deceiving him, but the girl herself didn't understand what he was talking about. He pulled his hand away from her face, and without that warmth, something in her chest felt empty. He stood up and asked her when she would be fully recovered, and she told him that she was almost well, and that pleased him. He looked at her for a few seconds in silence and smiled, and finally said that she was really perfect from head to toe, and was completely to his liking. She had heard him say that in the past, he had always wondered if she was tailor-made for him. It was just very surprising to him. Even though Raymond looked like a soulless man, he was completely different with her. I guess that was the reason for her flame inside that burned everything without even leaving ashes. As Kylos had said, to help in any way possible, even sacrificing oneself, that was love. If that was the definition, then her feelings for Kylos and the Emperor's love were real. But one thing she didn't understand was that doing anything, even completely destroying herself, could be called love. If so, then love was a useless feeling. The Emperor turned to Chloe and asked if she was happy. He also said that she shouldn't give it any special meaning, just the feelings of a man who had only spent one night with a woman. That's why he wanted to know if she was happy now. She couldn't give an answer because he wished her happiness, and she didn't feel that way. At dinner, the Emperor and Chloe and Kylos gathered. Kylos asked his brother if he could ask the coachman to wait for him, because it was already quite late. Raymond said with a satisfied smile that there was no need, and that he would spend tonight in the castle. Kylos was intrigued, for how could the Emperor leave his business so easily? Raymond was sure that nothing would happen in a few days, and he had his subjects in case of emergency. Kylos apologized for saying that, but the situation in the castle was not too good and they had a sick one. Raymond agreed, but he was going to stay here until Chloe's full recovery, and now Chloe looked better by his observation. Raymond turned to Chloe and told her not to worry because soon a healer would arrive from the imperial palace. The girl told His Majesty that everything was fine and that they had a healer and she was not that sick. He listened to the girl and agreed that they could do without a healer, but he still hadn't heard her answer. And then the girl realized that he was talking about the question of whether she was happy. His question kept repeating in her mind, and it seemed that any answer she gave would be untrue, for she could not even begin to describe her state of mind. After dinner, Kylos came to Chloe and asked her what she and the Emperor had talked about. but she only said that they had not talked about anything special. But it did not seem so to the man, and he wanted to know why she had kept it from him. Then she told Mr. Kalos that there was no need for him to know about this conversation, but he thought on the contrary that he should be aware of everything that was going on with her. Chloe didn't understand why he had to know absolutely everything, or if it was all about his plan to seduce the emperor. Kalos jumped up from his seat and grabbed Chloe's hand and said that everything was wrong, because he had already said that he loved her, but the girl wanted him to stop talking nonsense, because they both knew that it was impossible. The man wanted to understand why she said that it was nonsense, and then Chloe looked at him with a different look, not tender and affectionate as he was used to, but with anger and hatred, and told him that he had never wished her happiness. He already wanted to say that now he really wished her happiness. But Chloe told the gentleman that he never wished her happiness. He just had to say honestly that apparently he had a new task for her. She pulled out her hand, and Kylo said that he had already told her that he just wanted reciprocity. But the girl wondered why he had made her seduce the emperor, and what did it matter if she had already spent the night with him. He knelt down and admitted that it was all his fault, and he asked her to forgive him. He was just trying to change everything and get back. Chloe, looking at the marks on his arm, which would surely leave a bruise, she lost her temper. After all, what he was saying was so ridiculous that even if he begged her, Estelle, her little girl, would never come back. He kept asking her to give him another chance, and this time he would really make her happy, even if he had to put everything he had on the line. Chloe wondered how she planned to do that. She was suddenly filled with confidence and reminded herself that he had always wanted to be emperor. Kylos looked up at her and argued that he didn't need it now, and it didn't matter to him, and he only needed her. Then she wanted to hear what was capable of filling her life with happiness. But he didn't even know that, and then how was she going to make her happy? Just as she was about to leave, the man grabbed her dress and told her that she had always wanted a family, and he could be the family that would never leave her. She was amazed that he dared to talk about family. She wondered why he thought so, and Kylos answered that from the very first meeting she had only wished for the warmth of a man who would never leave her. And then Chloe realized that he had known about all her desires all along, and how could she fall in love again with someone who, despite that, continued to deceive her? She wanted to know why he had done that then, why he had taken Estelle away from her. Then, kneeling and sobbing, Kylos realized that Chloe had gone back in time too. She couldn't believe that after all that he was still daring to talk about happiness, because wasn't it ridiculous? Chloe couldn't help herself and told her uncle that he was disgusting to her, and now she wished him nothing but unhappiness. She was disgusted how he dared to cry in front of her eyes. She wanted to take out all the anger on him, and then she said out loud for him to hear that she wanted to wring his neck. She only wanted him to answer her question, and he listened attentively. She wanted to know what had become of her Estelle if it was true that he had killed her. But her uncle only remained silent and didn't even raise his head. When Kalos was 15 years old, he said that recently he had heard something incomprehensible. A man appeared and said that he was his own father. His mom couldn't believe it and decided to ask where the man was now. Kalos eventually led his mother to the man and killed him with her sword, thinking that she could finally sleep well because she had spent so many years searching for him, and who would have thought he would be hiding in such a remote area. Kalos asked his mom who he was, and then his mom said it was his dad, and then he realized that his birth father was not the emperor. His mother told him that he and the emperor had agreed on a deal, and it could be said that he was Kylos's father, but the marriage was just lip service, and in the end, he only overshadowed her honor because of his desire for Rudbihi. Only then did young Kalos realize why the emperor, who had always been gentle with his half-brother, was so cold to him. The boy wanted to know who else knew about it, and his mother said that her deceased father and she knew about it, as well as the emperor and the empress and his cooling father, so that left 3, but if you count Kylos, 4. Sometime later, his mother and the emperor's couple drank poisoned tea at a party and died. Kylos wished with all his heart that his half-brother would fall and get the only place in the world, and once he did, he would be the happiest man in the world. Kylos asked the emperor what kind of love he wanted, and Raymond asked him if he wanted it on a platter for him, because it would never work out in this life anyway, because now he had Caroline the witch by his side, and how could he date someone else? Then Kylos gave him the idea that he could have a mistress, But Raymond clucked his tongue and said that his brother didn't know about romance. Raymond didn't want to make the woman he mistress, and if he mistress, the witch boy, so he wasn't crazy to do such a thing. Kalos Rudbihi was bad at expressing emotions, but he used other people skillfully, so he carefully thought out a plan to seize power. The first time he met this girl, it may have been out of pity, but it was the first time Kylos had ever interfered in someone's life. By nature, Kylos liked something useful rather than beautiful, but at that moment, he wanted to give his hand to this girl, because he thought that everything in the world could be useful. So he comforted himself and gave his hand to the poor girl, and the one who grabbed it was Chloe. After the manor had burned down, Kylos thought that the girl was a poor thing because she was alone, and then she told him that she had been like that from the beginning. It was strange that this scruffy little girl seemed to him like a beautiful fairy from ancient lore. One day she came to her uncle and told him that she had heard that beauty was poison, and he wondered who had told her that, and she said that her mother had said so. So she got up from the table and he came to her and said that as long as he was near her, beauty would be a blessing, and he would help her to grow up to be the most beautiful in the world, and no one would be able to resist her. Then he thought that even the emperor could not resist her, and laughed and scared the girl, and she did not know if her uncle was all right. Then he apologized and asked what could go wrong because she was his beautiful Chloe. Kylos was very skillful in playing with other people's feelings, and that's why when Chloe confessed her feelings to him, it became easier for him to manipulate the young girl than to eat cold soup. Her declaration of love was so sweet, and looking at this confused face, he was glad. And that's how kisses appeared in their relationship. He had no need to be greedy in his feelings for her, because the main task was to spoil his brother, and to make the desired fashionable will be later. He remembered that she had said that she loved him. Then he thought that she could try a little harder for his sake, of course. Her unquestioning obedience seemed sweet to him. He often thought of her while working. Kylos thought he was just taking care of her. The brother, crazy with love, was on his own path to destruction, but Chloe was too attached to the baby. When Chloe had the baby and Kylos came to check on her, she said she named her Estelle, and he was surprised she gave her a name. She explained that she couldn't call her baby all the time. But he didn't like it, because first she didn't wear the earrings he had given her, and then she smiled happily at the child, and the fact that she sympathized with the dying emperor. He wanted Chloe to get rid of that affection when she saw his pathetic appearance, but it didn't go according to his plan. When his brother said that he was happy that Kylos would not kill her at least, he made her hesitate in an unthinkable way. She cried after those words looked like a broken doll crying over emotions he hadn't taught her, a mistake devoid of grace. When after the emperor's death, Chloe demanded Kylos to see Estelle, he thought only about whether she could stop crying and forget about the child, or whether she just needed a new child, and then she would calm down. Kylos wasn't going to have children out of wedlock, but if she wanted it so badly, one child was all he could afford. After all, more than anything, he just wanted to see her smile. And when he said he wanted to make her his mistress, she didn't react the way he'd planned, because he thought she'd be happy about it. In his imagination, Chloe should have thrown herself into his arms, because he was going to keep her with him forever, and she was sweet and charming and always gave him joy. But that day, when he said that he would call Chloe to him at night, he could not even think of betraying Enoch Brantz. When he seized Knight Brantz, he asked why he had done it, whether he had been seduced by Chloe or whether she had begged him to let her meet the child. But he decided to keep silent until the end. They tortured him as hard as they could and burned him with red-hot iron and branded him, but he didn't even make a single sound. Chloe, who had fallen out of favor after his act, was locked in Kylos' bedroom for days. He tried to change her feelings, but in the end, the baby ruined everything. He just didn't want to see her like that, so he locked her in and didn't come over at all. After all, before, when he was away for long periods of time, she was only too happy to hide her burning face. But this time, when he came back and opened the door to his room, he was in a wild horror. He saw Chloe lying on the floor, all pale and cold. He kept asking her to answer him. After all, he had come to her and wanted her to answer him. He did not understand why it happened. Kylos Rudbihi remembered the day when she had first appeared to him and told him how she felt. Kylos had only thought of the day he would use her to seize the throne, so he thought it was the perfect opportunity. With trembling hands, he ran his finger over her lips, and the tears that rolled down his cheeks fell down her face. He wondered if perhaps he had loved her even then. But why had it all worked out so well? Why was she the only one who was dead? Then he thought that she was offended by him, and that was why she did not open her eyes and did not answer him. He wanted to know what had offended her so much. He thought that perhaps she had been offended because of Elizabeth Rosalind, and then she was ready to kill her, and he wanted to know what else he had to do for her. He thought that perhaps she wanted to become empress, but then he realized that was not what she wanted, because all she wanted was his love, and he was ready to give that love to her, and confessed, kissing her cold lips, that he loved her. He didn't understand or didn't want to understand and accept why she didn't look at him and why she still didn't answer him, because he told her he loved her. Only as the sun rose could Kylos recognize Chloe's death. Then he ordered the guards to bring Rosalind to him. It wasn't hard for him to find the culprit, for the woman had always hated and abused Chloe, and it was a mistake not to do anything about it. Kylos realized it was his fault. Before he killed the Marquise, she said that it was all Chloe's fault because she had forgotten where she belonged, and she was sitting in the emperor's bedroom, and she had provoked Elizabeth. After that, there was an uproar in the imperial palace. There were rumors that every night the emperor held a dead girl in his arms and wandered around the castle with her. He danced with her in one of the halls and hummed that she said she loved him, and he still waited for her to open her eyes. Why she didn't look at him? Everything turned out as he planned. Everything except Chloe. He thought that getting the throne was enough to make him happy, but even that didn't make him any better, because without Chloe, everything in this world looked too dim. Now Kylos realized it. He remembered those tiny hands grabbing him. He remembered those loving eyes looking at him with great tenderness. And he remembered those scarlet lips that shyly loved him and that he loved to kiss as a reward for her good behavior. The way that girl acted as if she were elevating him to the status of a shrine Kylos had never felt before in his life. A shrine is the only family. Kylos, the almighty Kylos. He raised a girl 5 years younger than him so that she would love him unconditionally. But Kylos's arrogance came back to haunt him. That girl said he was the one who saved her, but it was actually Kylos who was getting her salvation all along. Nothing could replace her. Chloe, his precious Chloe. He wondered how long he'd been trying to suppress those feelings, why he hadn't told her about them. He had told her he loved her, and maybe for a long time he had loved her all along. Everyone was saying that the new emperor had gone mad, and Kylos could no longer distinguish what had gone wrong and at what point. As he walked down the hallway holding Chloe in his arms, he remembered how he had suggested she just have another baby so she would stop crying. How he'd asked her to bear a child for the emperor, and how he'd manipulated her into doing it for him. And remembered the way he'd said he liked Chloe too, since he had to bring him the emperor's head. Every moment. Once Kylos had died and the slow approach of death had pulled Kylos out of the sea of misery, he heard a distant voice asking what was wrong with him and why cold sweat was running off him. When he opened his eyes, he saw Elizabeth Rosalind in front of him. Kylos opened his eyes in horror and couldn't catch his breath. The Marquise shouted at the healer that he had forgotten his duty, for his lord was not well. The physician apologized and explained that Lady Garnish's condition was so serious that he had to stay with her. But the Marquise could not understand how he dared to be late because of that girl when the lord was in a bad way. Kylos also heard about Chloe's illness and jumped out of bed and rushed to her. When he ran to her, he saw her sleeping and red with fever. He could not believe how it happened, and then the healer who ran after him said that after returning from the New Year's festival, she had a slight fever. But it looked like this time she was overworked. Suddenly, a memory came over him abruptly. The New Year's festival when Kylos had ordered her to seduce the emperor, and that was when he realized he had come back to that exact time. He cried at the fact that poor Chloe was so sick. He approached her, and realizing that he had been completely oblivious to her, and yet she was alive, and that was the most important thing to him. He wasn't going to make the same mistake. Would it make a difference if he just regretted it? Foolish Kylos thought it would make a difference if he could turn back time. He wanted it so badly that he would have to feel the full extent of his regrets in the reverse time stream, just as she was unhappy. No, let him be even more unhappy than she was. Chloe wished she could wring his neck with those hands. He didn't want to make the same mistake again, however that promise ended up going far from Kylos' plan. After taking little Estelle away from Chloe and making her not want to live, how dare he even say all that? She left the room and walked out into the garden. She didn't need it anymore. She didn't want to cry in front of him, but the tears wouldn't listen and still covered her face. Suddenly, Knight Brance came up to her with a cloak and said it was cold today, so she should put something on. He apologized to the lady, but he was afraid she might get sick if she walked around like that. The girl was grateful to him, but she wasn't going back to the room, and then Brun said he could take her somewhere else, but she said she would just stay here for a while. Chloe wondered if he'd been watching her all this time, but how he'd managed to get out at exactly the same moment she had. Then he asked if he could just hang around her. Knight Enoch Brance was always like that. He must have noticed that her eyes were red, but luckily he didn't ask any questions and just stayed by her side. It was so strange that his mere presence was a comfort to her. It was the first time she had come to this place since returning to the past. A place she'd created for Kylos, and he'd brought another woman here as if for show. Then, out of anger, she grabbed a tree branch and broke it. The knight got worried and pulled out a handkerchief. She thought it was like she was crazy since she felt a nice coolness from the cut. The knight took her palm and wrapped it around the wound, saying that Lady Garnish was not to be left unattended. But she wasn't asking for help, and he understood that, but he couldn't just turn a blind eye. When he finished rewinding her palm, she looked up and looked into his beautiful green eyes, but the knight blushed, and then Chloe laughed and apologized, saying that she didn't want to embarrass him. Chloe was surprised to see Knight Brance trying to hide his embarrassed look. She explained that it was just the first time they had talked so much, and she would be sure to give him an even better shawl as a reward, but those words made Knight Brance blush even more red. Then he apologized and said he didn't want to regret it again. He also said that he was too talkative and apologized for overstepping his bounds. It turned out Knight Brance was a shyer man than she had realized, and today her opinion of him had changed a bit. She asked what he was talking about, and then he said her smile was beautiful. Then she realized that she was able to smile for the first time in a long time with peace of mind, and at that moment, tears ran down her cheeks. She was overcome with feelings, but she didn't make a sound. She suddenly remembered Raymond's words about how he wanted to ask if she was happy. In her blurred memories, she was a child. The man who was called her father always took his anger out on her, even though her mom was beaten all the time, but she wouldn't let go of her hand until the very last moment. She couldn't stop, so she just gave in to the urge she wanted to feel those emotions again, but no matter how hard she tried, she only got out the squeezed sounds she didn't want to hear. Brance led her back to the manor, and she thanked him for that, and told him that she could walk to her room on her own, and then he bid Lady Garnish goodnight. On her way to her room, she passed the guest room and thought that was where Raymond was now, and the last time their bodies had intertwined in this room. That was when he had told her how he really felt and promised to find a way to keep her by his side. The man died because of her, or rather she killed him. Now she knew he really loved her. She wished so much that Raymond would forgive her, and that apologies that would never reach him would dissolve into the emptiness of this hallway. She asked that Raymond never contact her in this life. She repeated it all night. The man who had deceived her and taken Estelle. She could no longer be near him, for he had become to her a darkness that only took away. An impenetrable darkness. In the man's house, she did not want to stay a moment longer. At some point, her door clicked and she ran to it, and as soon as the door opened, the Emperor appeared behind her and she greeted him. He lifted her face so that she could raise her eyes to him and asked her what was causing her suffering right now. She didn't even know if he was angry or worried and replied that it was nothing like that. She had never spoken to him in such a confident voice before, for all she had to do was smile radiantly and whisper meekly, and now to him she was just a one-night stand and she should have pushed him away to keep him safe. She apologized to His Majesty and said that he should have left because this place was not fit for his lordship. Then he came abruptly to her and said that he would decide where to be. He saw that he had frightened her a little and repeated that he would be here until she was well again. That tone might have frightened someone else, but she knew that it was his voice that lulled and soothed Estelle, who was crying. She didn't understand why he didn't have to do that because she was a woman who wasn't worthy of the Emperor. Then Raymond said he could call it a responsibility. She asked if he always cared about women he had only had one night of fun with, and blushing, he asked what if he did. Chloe replied that he didn't have to take care of her like that because they'd only spent one night together, and he was already taking responsibility, and it was too cruel. He asked her about the one night and she nodded, and then he grabbed her by the shoulders and was about to shout something, but she turned her head aside and said that if he just wanted her body, but he interrupted her and said that he was not such a pervert to force intimacy with a sick girl. She suddenly remembered the words he'd said to her before he'd told her how she could be everything from top to toe to be his type. The moment when they first met at the ball, maybe he had already fallen in love with Chloe. He roughly guessed what she was going to say, but that was not the point. He was not romantic enough to fall in love with a strange woman at first sight, so she had to put aside these impudent thoughts and get better. Chloe tried to hide her embarrassment with a smile, because it seemed to her that if she showed it, she would be embarrassed even more. Raymond repeated that he would not go anywhere until she was fully recovered. Then, Chloe confidently said that if he was talking about her illness, she was already fine, and if he didn't believe her, they could even call a doctor. Raymond said that she was still crying and she had decided to wipe her eyes just in case, and then she shouldn't have shown him her tears, but she claimed that she hadn't cried. He confirmed with a smile that she really wasn't crying, but if she needed help in finding happiness, she could ask for anything. Those unexpected words clouded her mind for a moment. He was talking about happiness for someone like her. He already thought she was going to refuse it, but she answered in the negative, and the Emperor was pleased with that. He hoped that she would be able to be present during dinner, for he and his brother had to eat breakfast together. After he left, she stood for a long time thinking about happiness and her happiness. She didn't know what happiness was, but joy and pleasure. Trying for Kylos used to give her those feelings, but at the same time it brought her pain. And Estelle, yes, she was the one who gave her true joy. Maybe that so-called happiness is this tiny baby. Suddenly there was a knock on Kylos' door, and he irritatedly said that he asked not to come in. But when after the knock Chloe came through the door, he didn't expect to see her, but nevertheless he was happy. For someone who hadn't lost anything, he looked too exhausted. Kylos came out from behind the desk and said that the place was a bit of a mess because there was a lot of work to do. Chloe said she'd come to talk to him about something, and Kylos invited her to sit down. She told him without delay that she was leaving the fortress. He couldn't believe his ears, and the girl also said that she wanted to leave and wanted him to let her. He wanted to know what it meant, and Chloe said that it would be ridiculous to continue living with him. But he thought it would be ridiculous if she left him. She asked him if he really thought so, and for a moment she thought he'd gone mad. He said that she should think about it. They had been together since her childhood, and there was a trust between them that could not be shared with anyone else. But Chloe reminded him that it was all in the past. Everything was different for her now, and it was him who had betrayed her trust. He asked with a distraught look what the Emperor had said to her. He was almost certain that the man had incited her to do something, for if he had not, she would not be saying such things now. He wanted her to tell him what the Emperor had said to her. His foul breath, his arm around her waist, his wrinkled face, everything about him disgusted her. She sharply pushed him away from her, telling him to get away from her, and shouted that it had nothing to do with the Emperor. She just wanted to leave him because he disgusted her. His words cut his heart and soul, and he asked her not to say that. She wondered if he always showed his feelings that way. But no, Kylos was a skilled manipulator, and he was good at playing with other people's feelings and controlling his own, so she could resist that look like he was about to faint. Then he said that since he had betrayed her, they could assume it was true, and now she could take her anger out on him. He was willing to accept her hatred, but he wasn't going to let her leave him. She didn't understand how she should have realized that, because their relationship was not normal, and being together would only bring each other pain. Then she reminded him that he had told her that he wanted her to be happy, and so he had to let her go. But he said he couldn't do that. She wanted to know why he couldn't do that, and then he begged and pleaded with her. He was ready to listen to her, and she could beat him, hate him, and curse him, but only that she wouldn't leave him.